We've talked about the issues between siblings. We've talked about the issues that happen with regards to marriage. We've talked about blended families. We've talked about all kinds of things. This week, we look at a story about raising children. Eli was the priest. In Samuel chapter 2, verses 12 through 25, Reverend Haynes read either the NIV or the King James. Which did you read today? Read the King James Version. And so there's some things that you may not fully understand from that version. And so if you don't mind, I want to first kind of clarify some things so that you can understand it, that you might understand this text. Now, even before I clarify, I want to make certain to say this. You're probably going to hear it at least 2 times because it seems that some people are scared of a storm. So I don't see everybody this morning, but I thank God for you. You're not scared of a storm. Though you know who takes care of the storm. But one of the things that I have asked our trustees, and I want you to follow their leadership. I've asked our trustees to make certain after worship that the administrative offices are clear. There should not be any children in the administrative offices. And unless you are the guest of someone who is in the office on Sunday, then there shouldn't be anybody in the offices on Sunday except for those people who are supposed to be there. When worship is over, I want them to also go and make certain that the fellowship hall is clear. They're going to close the doors. And once the doors have closed, that is an indication that you should not enter. And especially children. Because once they've cleaned the building ought to stay clean till the following week. And so they're going to do that. And then they're going to come and look at the sanctuary and make sure that we're doing the right things here as well. One of my concerns is that sometimes we have children who are not acting appropriately. And when I say appropriately, I mean appropriate to your age. See, there is this idea that I'm old enough so I should be allowed to do this. And I know they come and tell you they want to go skating, they want to go to movies by themselves, and so on and so forth. But if you have wisdom, you should not let them go anywhere if they don't know how to walk in a church. If they're not trained well enough, if they're not learned well enough to behave in the sanctuary, then I would be suspect in terms of whether they are ready to be anywhere else on their own and independent. This is the place where we train our children. I was telling our deacons this morning, when I grew up in this church, I learned how to read in this church. See, that they didn't wait on the teacher to teach us to read. We had to read because when Bible study came around, they had us to read. And you try reading the King James at 7 years old. But they would make us do it because then they didn't ask who wants to read. They punted, you next. And when Reverend McQuarrie was waiting for you to read, he didn't ask twice. And one reason he didn't ask twice, because Brother and Sister Wesley, there was this whole idea of embarrassment. Your parents didn't want to be embarrassed. Pastor called on you to read, you better read. I never understand why there are times in this congregation where I've had to say something to a child, and I hear the parents say, "Thank God Pastor got him." Now, I understand other people saying that, but if you're the parent, then they ought to be calling on God, not you. They ought to be saying, "Oh, Lord, Pastor caught me." Because there's a sense of embarrassment that ought to come forward. We ought not be proud when our children are not doing the right thing. When our kids aren't doing the right thing, we ought to be concerned about it. And it starts here in the church. Now, there are some people say, well, you know what? That's a shame, Pastor, talk like that. Kids will be kids. Not Liberty Hill children. Not Liberty Hill children. We are not going to accept anything that is substandard. Right. If you are a member of Liberty Hill Baptist Church, if you come to Liberty Hill Baptist Church over 5 times, and you've got some children, expect them to be successful. We're not going to expect anything less. I expect them to be successful because they're going to learn when they come here. And if they can't do that, then they need to be sitting with you. And if you can't correct them, you ought to very nicely come and tell me. Don't wait till the government and come and take your kids. And you must relinquish authority to the government. Come to the pastor and give me some authority. And I guarantee you, I can straighten them up. Now, you ought to. But I can't. Because we can't let children just do anything. Now you say, well, Pastor, why you say that? Because, you know what? If there are 5 families left in this church, if everybody jumped up and left and there were 5 families left in this church, and they had some children, Sister Moore, do you know that this church would not have to move? This church would not have to worry about any financial debt or anything like that. You know why, Pastor King? Because if there are 5 families left in this church and they raise 5 children that are respectable and know what to do, then those 5 children will be responsible enough, educated enough, wise enough, and good stewards. That those 5, I have every confidence that they'll be able, it'll be just us and them 5. Because they'll be successful enough to say, our church is doing fine. Because our children are successful. We are successful. And if you wait, I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to show you exactly what happens. It's in the text. It's in the text today. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 12 through 25. I'm going to tell you exactly how this text goes. As a matter of fact, one of the easiest ways to do this is I'm going to read it to you from the New Living Translation. I want you to hear how this text works because there's some tricky elements to the text that I don't want you to lose. Now the sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or for their duties as priests. Whenever anyone offered a sacrifice, Eli's sons would send over a servant with a 3-pronged fork while the meat of the sacrificed animal was still boiling. The servant would stick the fork into the pot and demand that whatever it brought up be given to Eli's sons. And the Israelites who came to worship at Shiloh were treated this way. Sometimes the servants would come even before the animal's fat had been burned on the altar. He would demand raw meat before it had been boiled so that it could be used for roasting. And the man offered the sacrifice might reply by saying, take as much as you want, but the fat must be burned. So the men that would bring the animal for sacrifice would remind them that you take the meat, but at least leave the fat, because that's what needed to be burned on the altar. So that the sins of these young men was so serious that what they would do is these folks would say, no, give it to me now, or I'll take it by force. Take the meat even before the fat was burned. So that the sins of these young men was very serious in the sight of the Lord, for they treated the Lord's offerings with contempt. And so if you go to verse 25, or verse 22, verse 22, you'll see, now Eli was very old, but he was aware of what his sons were doing to the people of Israel. He knew, for instance, that his sons were seducing the young women who assisted at the entrance of the tabernacle. Eli said to them, I have been hearing reports from all the people about the wicked things you are doing. Why do you keep sinning? You must stop, my sons. The reports I hear among the Lord's people are not good. If someone sins against another person, God can mediate for the guilty party. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede? But Eli's sons wouldn't listen to their father, for the Lord was already planning to put them to death. Now that's a sermon by itself. If you just think about what this text is saying, that's a sermon all by itself. Some of you may say, well, I don't have children. As you listen to today's message, think of it as your resources. All of us have something that we've birthed. All of us have something that the Lord has blessed us with, but many of us have children. Many of us have grandchildren. This text affects us. Because number one, we recognize that a future is misguided when there are certain things that take place. The Bible tells us to train up a child in the way that it should go. And when it gets old, it won't depart. And so it's important for us to train them very early, because if we wait, we'll have a mess on our hands. It's a lot easier to train them now than to wait. Because, Sister Morel, I will tell you, as I've said any number of times in this church, if you fail to train a child, you'll raise a child who someday you yourself will not like. There are folks, because they did not take the time to train their children while they were young, in their heart of hearts, they might not even tell you. They can't stand to see their kids coming. Because they know that there's going to be a problem every time they come around. Notice in the text that Eli, he had the problem when he was younger, but when he was older, it affected him even more. Because as you get older, who takes care of you? As you get older and you have more time to think about life, when you're contemplating and when you're going over the memories of your life, you realize that your children have not come up to the standard that you wanted them to be at. Then you begin to get affected as you get older. You watch your grandkids and so on and so forth, because it goes into the next generation. In the last few verses of this text, it says that his future is going to be cut off because the sons are going to die. And so Eli and his sons have a misguided future. One of the ways you know that your future is misguided is when you don't know the Lord. Your children should know the Lord. I know you saw it in the verse there in 12. Now the sons of Eli, they knew not the Lord. I hear people tell me all the time, well, the kids didn't feel like coming to church. Well, do they live next door? Or do they live with you? Because if they live with you, there is no reason for you to say that they didn't feel like coming to church. Let me show you something. Those who are older in this room, and when I say older, I'll even say my age and older. We can remember a time, I don't watch the news today, Brother Chaz Williams, but I remember that my grandfather did. Every day, 6 o'clock, he's sitting in front of the television. He had the news on. You had to watch the news. America used to watch the news. And as we sat and watched the news, you understood that there were certain crimes that were committed by certain folk in certain neighborhoods. There were certain crimes that you would not even think of. Some of the stuff that people are doing today, we would not have even thought of. And so I had to ask myself a question, and I was talking to myself. I said, self, what has changed from the time when you were a boy watching the news with your grandparents and today? I had to think about it. Well, restaurants hadn't changed. We still had McDonald's and Wendy's. We had a Red Lobster. We dressed different when we went there. We still had restaurants, so we are eating. Now, I know the quality of food is not as good as it was, many, many years ago, but it's still food. So therefore, Brother Sloan, people are still eating and they're still drinking water. So that's the same. I eat, your kids eat. We still live indoors in communities and neighborhoods. Nothing has changed about that. And we live in the city. So we have neighbors and we have houses. That's the same. Nothing has really changed about that. Now, some people will contend that music has changed, but Brother Charles said, music really hadn't changed either, because although Juicy Fruit is a gum, it was also a song. And I know that when Aretha Franklin was talking about, Dr. Feelgood and all those kind of things, music has not really changed that much. You can say that some of the rhythms and those kind of things have changed, but music still has those undertones and overtones and sexual innuendo and so on and so forth. Music is still somewhat the same. I said, well, now, maybe it's the clothes. No, well, clothes haven't really changed all that much either. In my grandparents' day, there was the zoot suit with the long coat and the long chain. As we were growing up, there were bell bottoms, and there were the hip hugger jeans. That's nothing new. So fashion hasn't changed a lot. There was skin shown in places. There's a little more skin today than then. But fashion is still risky at times. I said, what has changed? Well, the crime rate has gone up. The divorce rate has gone up. Murder rate gone up. All of the negative stuff seems to have come to a place where we're at a rise. So what changed? Brother Tracy Turner, people are still going to school. We still have school all the way from kindergarten through the 12th grade, and our children are smarter now when they start kindergarten than I was when I finished kindergarten. Because Sister Rose Featherstone, when I finished kindergarten, I had just got my ABCs back when we taught them in that order. These children now, they finish school, when they finish kindergarten, they have sight words. They're reading books by the end of kindergarten. We didn't do that when we were kids. So they're smarter. We can read. What has changed? I'll tell you what has changed. Look around. The church has changed. It's the church. There are fewer people in church now than ever before. We went from 8% to 22% almost overnight. The church has changed. People have so much to do and so much on their minds that there's no time to stop and think about God. And even if I stop and stop by the church, as you've done this morning, and I applaud you for that, oftentimes the problem is that we've left our children behind. And we're so used to working, and we're so used to dropping our children off to the daycare that now the church has become a society of people who work as though we're still going through the regiment of the week. What do I mean by that? Sister Deborah Littlefield, when people go to work now, they stop by the daycare, they let their children out, and they go to work. They stop by the school, they let their children out, and they go to work. And so that has become our mode. So what happens now when we come to church, we expect for somebody to have a nursery, or they've got to have a daycare, or they've got to have a school, they've got to have somewhere that I drop my kids off so I can worship in peace. Sometime I wonder, Sister Magwood, do folk come to church to worship or so that they can get a break and a free babysitter on Sunday? I might not be talking to you here in the church, but you got to remember, I'm talking to some folk on the internet also. And so I'm saying to you that we cannot have this disconnection with our children, for we feel like we are not worship with them. What makes the difference between you worshiping and your child worshiping? As a matter of fact, I hear people all the time say, well, you cannot leave education to the teacher. You've got to also train your children at home. So therefore, don't expect for the pastor to be the only person training your child, or the deacons or the folk in the children's church training your child to worship. You also have a stake in this. You must train them to worship. They ought to be in the sanctuary looking at you and seeing worship come from mama and daddy. You are their leader. And so we must train them to respect God. We must pray at home. We must wake them up and pray with them after we've had our prayer time. Don't leave your door open like that, because the enemy is out to steal your future. Your children are your future if you don't train them. The enemy will make sure that they get trained. Because the spirit of defiance, because of our humanness, is already within them. And so train up a child. You must train them to respect God. But then if you look at verse 17, you see it says, wherefore the sins of the young men were very great before the Lord, for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. They caused other folk to even have trouble. And so don't let your children destroy worship. My mother had a rule. She said to me that when you go to school, you may not be the smartest child in school, and you may not be able to be the smartest child in school. And let's face it, all of us are not gifted with intelligence. But one of the things that my mother told me is she told me, Reverend Donna Haynes, she said, you may not be able to do all that the other children can do, but I know that you can keep your mouth closed and stay in your seat and behave, so that you don't disrupt the other children that are there to learn. And so it ought to be our job to make sure at the very least that our children know how to sit still. Now I understand that there are certain situations, chemical imbalances and so on and so forth. Now, however, Kelly, I wish that our parents had understood chemical imbalances. My daddy drank a little liquor, and some of us might have had some chemical imbalances, but for some reason or another, our mothers did not take that into account. And so on Sunday, if I decided that I was going to run around the church, she would affect my chemical imbalance. They didn't let us disrupt worship. I can't remember children up running around the sanctuary when we were younger. And our sanctuary was a lot smaller, but I don't remember that. Now, part of the reason I don't remember it is because, number one, I couldn't look behind me. My grandmother didn't allow us to turn around and look behind. You look forward. That's where things are going on. And so they taught us to have an attention span. They taught us to be able to sit down for a while. Let me tell you that if you have faith, interesting to me, Deacon Johnson, the first time somebody has a problem in this church health-wise, let you go to the doctor tomorrow and he'll tell you that your heart is beating irregularly. You step in that doctor's office and he tell you that he thinks you have some type of tumor. The first thing folk do, call the pastor. Pastor, doctor said that something's wrong with my heart, and I'm believing God for a healing, and I'm standing on the principles of God, and I've got 2 or 3 standing together, and we're praying that I might be healed from my... Then don't you think that your child can be healed from the infirmity that the doctor has fooled you to believe that they have? If I'm going to pray when the doctor tells me I have a heart ailment, then I'm certainly going going to pray when they tell me that my child can't pay attention? Could you imagine today in this political climate, Brother Hugh White, if President Barack Obama or Mr. Mitt Romney, if they had a chemical imbalance? Could you imagine what the media would say in the commercials? How many people would vote for a president who's all hopped up on drugs? How many people would vote for a president who they say cannot pay attention? People, listen to what I'm saying to you. Don't let all say that I'm not sympathetic. I'm very sympathetic. I love children. I'm sympathetic enough to tell you that it is our job to pray for them and to lead them and guide them to love God, but at the same time it is our job to lead them and guide them so that their future might be bright. And if we don't demand and expect something greater, no matter what anybody else says, doctor, I still believe that God is greater than all of that. Now, sometimes the problem is that we are not active enough in our children's lives. And we've allowed them to go to hell in a handbasket because we have not been present. We have not been active and engaged when we can. And yes, I know we use that excuse. I got a job, I got to work, I got to do this, I got so much stuff to do. Let me tell you that your first priority is family. Notice that you can't have a baby with your clothes on. Pastor, what do you mean? What I mean is that in order to create family, we've got to give up something. In order to create family, we must become naked before God. In order to create family, we must lose some things. And so, in order for you to maintain family, there will come time. You don't have a baby in a wedding dress. While you're trying to look cute out there Forever 21 on Friday evening, right after work at 5:30, trying to get your things to go out in. You should have thought of that. Because while you're at Forever 21, your forever is being messed up at home. And I know you got to work. I know you got obligations. But what keeps you from being with your children in the sanctuary? It tells you that sometimes our priorities are not altogether right. We must ask ourselves the question, what is my focus? Let's teach them to love the Lord, but then we cannot allow them to disrupt worship. Not just worship here, but worship in your home. Here folks say, well, I can't handle them. You better handle them. Because either you handle them or Sister Rose Featherston, later on somebody else will handle them. Then you'll be asking the pastor, let me give you this address and this inmate number. I don't want an inmate number. I want number to college dormitory. I want number to which hospital building they're working in. I want number of the date when they pass the bar. I want those kind of numbers. Numbers first year in business, owning a heating and cooling or a plumbing business. I want those kind of numbers. Numbers, not the number of children, the number of the date they got married, and then the number of children. Those are the kind of numbers I want. And so we cannot allow them to disrupt worship, because when they disrupt worship, when they disrupt the peace of the family, and we allow that, then we curse our own generations to come, because then we teach them to walk in a cycle of disruptiveness. We must teach them to worship God and not to hinder the worship of anybody else. That starts at home. Quiet time at home. Don't let your house be loud all day. Have some quiet time at your house. Have some time where the children need to sit down for a moment. Starts in small increments and continues to move on. Have some time when the television is off. Have some time where they need to read. Have some time where they need to check some verses out in the Bible. Have some time where they need to pray. You are supposed to be Christians. Either you're Christians or you're people that are supposed to come and hold these seats down. These seats are fine. But if you're really Christians and you're raising children or you have grandchildren, you teach them to worship. I was in the line the other day over at Chipotle. Young man that must have had one of those imbalances because he couldn't focus. All I wanted was a vegetarian burrito, brown rice, black beans, and some fajitas. You tell them that, they ask you again. Brown rice, black beans, fajitas. You tell them that, they put the brown rice, they ask you again. Brown rice, black beans, and fajitas. They all sit side by side. Then I understood why he couldn't pay attention. Sister Jackie Turner, no soon as he got the black beans and the fajitas, no soon as he completed it, then he was standing in the corner. He said, teach me how to do it. Teach me how to do it. Teach you how to put together a burrito. Our minds are everywhere else. When we need to teach young people to focus, to focus, to focus. But then you say, Pastor, why are you telling us all this? I'm not telling you this to complain. I don't want you to think that this is a complaint, because it is not at all a complaint. I'm telling you this because I want you to be the best. I'm telling you this because I want our young people that come from Liberty Hill Baptist Church to be the best young people in the city of Columbus, in the state of Ohio, in the United States, in the world. I want people to come to Columbus, Ohio, because they say, I heard people say that we have the best hospital, Brother Sloan. People come from all over the world. They fly to come to the Ohio State University Hospital for certain procedures. There are over 2,000 procedures that we do here that they don't do anywhere else in the world. And when they come, I want them to say, I've come here to the Ohio State University Hospital, and I understand that there's 2,000 some things that only they do here. But then I heard that there's only one doctor in this hospital that does the procedure, and that doctor came from Liberty Hill Baptist Church. I want to hear them when they say that there was a voice on the Supreme Court that changed the tide of time. They said that dissenting voice, or that voice that was in the majority that led the Supreme Court justices to do the right thing, you know that person started at the Liberty Hill Baptist Church in Columbus, Ohio? I want our young people to be the best young people. They cannot do it without our help. They cannot do it unless I say to you sometimes these difficult things. Because again, this is not the kind of sermon that boosts the offering. This is not the kind of sermon that says, oh, I want to go back next week. He's crazy. But this is the kind of sermon, let me show you, that does this for you. Can I show you what it does for you? And then you ought to be real happy that Pastor said this to you. Look at verse 25. If one man sinned against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. How do you end up with a misguided future? You can't let your children not know the Lord. You don't let them destroy worship. But then you need to know that disobedience leads to death. This is why I'm saying this to you. I don't want the death of your generation. I don't want you to just be gone and your line to be wiped out. I don't want that to happen for you. If you look at 31, verse 31 said, behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thy house. Not only is he saying here that the boys are going to die, but your whole line is going to die. Let me tell you that no matter what they said about you, no matter where you've come from, who your mother and father, who they might have been, today is the day to break the curse. That the curse may no longer be found. In that great hymn that we sing during our Christmas season, Joy to the World, there's a verse that says that the curse may no longer be found. He's come. The Lord has come. The Lord has come. Joy to the world because the Lord has come. And I'm saying to you that I don't want to provoke our children to anger. But I do want to agitate them toward greatness. I don't believe in child abuse or misuse. But I certainly believe that we are abusing them and misusing them when we allow their future to fail. Because unfortunately, they're not strong enough, they're not smart enough, they're not wise enough to lead themselves. It is our job, it is your job to rally together as community, as both individual and church, to say to our children, you must be great, you will be great. There is no exception. We will not accept failure. We will not accept anything that is not like God. Train up a child in the way that it should go, and when he gets old, it won't depart from it. We've got to train them. We've got to lead them. We've got to guide them. We've got to come alongside them and love them enough to tell them when they're wrong, encourage them when they're right. We've got to make certain that we're leading them and guiding them so that their future might be bright, so that someday as you get old, you might be able to look out and say, thank God I've got a good children. Just to be able to look at them and recognize that they're taking care of mom and daddy. They're not going to see me outdoors. They're not going to see me bothered. They're going to take care of me. Why? Because I've taken care of them, because I've led them, because I've guided them, because I've treated them in the way that the Lord would have me to, because I've taught them to fear the Lord and to respect God. These are the things that's required of you. Start now. Don't accept those little kids, those babies telling you no. Don't accept it. It teaches them disobedience. It teaches them to be disobedient to you. It teaches them to be disobedient to God. Don't allow it. Don't allow no to be in the vocabulary that is coming from the child to the parent. That should never be in the vocabulary of a child. I'm telling you right, you might not like it. You might think it's cute when they're saying no now and being disrespectful and turning their back and so on and so forth. When they turn their back, you need to let them know you see their back. Cannot allow your children to be disobedient, because all you're doing is setting them up for failure, because the Lord will not allow it. Teach them how to treat you so that they might know how to treat God. And when somebody says something to your child and you know that it is right, stop twisting your head and poking out your lips and getting upset. Accept it. But don't be dumb. Sister Wynn, be embarrassed, because you should be. But allow that embarrassment to lead you and guide you not to be embarrassed anymore. Deacon David Hodge, our parents had some good words. You might be embarrassed me this time. Don't embarrass me no more. I lived 2 streets over from a young man. We all went to Catholic school together. That boy, guess his mama had whooped his butt one night, went to school the next day and told the teacher. So they called her over to school. Well, we talking about the 1970s now. They called her. She went over there to the Catholic school, and see, little did he know he was in a Catholic school. And see, Catholics, they'll beat you. Called her over to the school. She went over to school and they said, your son said that you put a whip on him or whatever, you know, because you know them switches would put them little marks on you, whatnot. She said, well, I sure appreciate y'all telling me, but I guarantee you he won't tell you again. Them folks had a way of making you successful. But if I might testify, I was the worst of the worst. Cuss out everybody's children. They sent me home from the rec center. Put me out, said don't come back no more. Cussed everybody out. Aunt called on the telephone. I had to cuss her out one day. Oh, I had some ways in me. But my mother and my grandparents were determined that that wouldn't stay in me. My daddy was determined. One day they asked me, said, what do you want to be when you grow up? 1970s, okay? For those of you who were raised in my era or old enough to remember, you remember there was a movie called Superfly. Curtis Mayfield wrote the soundtrack. I'm your pusher. So, one day, some family friends were over, and they asked, little boy, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, a street man. My daddy hit me and slid me across the floor. It's the one and only time he ever hit me. And I got up with changed perspective. And so today, I've preached to thousands of people. I've ministered to one just as I've ministered to thousands. Been to the White House, worked for Billy Graham, ate with the president. Never been locked up, never been downtown. Don't have a record. Been to one of the finest universities on the face of the earth. Finished not 1 degree, but 3. Wrote a couple of books, 2 or 3. Married successfully. And I stand today as a testimony of what God can do. If you keep your kids where they're supposed to be, and you do what you're supposed to do, which is not always easy, our young people will not have a misguided future, but they will have a guided future that leads them to greatness. Amen?